Are you with us? Maybe try exiting and coming back. If you can hear me.
Hey, here we go.
Oh, there we go.
They had a lot of pop-ups I had to navigate
I noticed that too. So welcome. We are live. I am recording. This is being recorded. We may at the end open this up to people for people to be able to join on video if you want. Just be aware that if you do that, your name, your handle will be broadcasted out to Twitter. So welcome. I want to, before we really get into stuff too much, I definitely want to give this a couple of minutes to let people kind of get on. So how are you doing?
I'm good. How is the connection? Are we doing good?
Seems good. Yeah. Excellent. Are you on your tablet or on your?
No, I got on the laptop.
Okay. Okay. Welcome. So we have a couple of people. I know there were 12 people subscribed to this today, which was higher than a lot of the ones that were scheduled for today. So not all of them, but some of them. Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Hello, Denise. I see Denise on there. I think I see Denise on there.
Welcome, Denise. So we have 12 people subscribed. If this is something that you think somebody shared, thank you. Somebody shared this.
I suppose you share by telling a little bird. Is that what it says on the side?
Yeah. Yeah. So you can click that and then it will share it to people. And I did share it to my followers as well. So somebody, Syed, shared this. Thank you so much. Looks like they're a Bernie supporter.
Oh. Well, you can see my Hillary thing right there, I believe. One of many things.
Yeah, you can kind of see that back there.
Yeah.
So I thank you everybody for being here. So obviously, as the title suggests, we are talking about sexual abuse, and Candace has been kind enough, courageous enough to choose to do this with me. You know, I wanted to do a Blab, and she said that she would do it with me. So we kind of talked about it and decided to do a little bit where she would share some things. So I'm excited to get started. So for those of you who may not know me, I am Peggy Oliveira, and I am also a survivor of abuse, a former psychotherapist, and now I'm doing virtual coaching and mentoring, working with people who have abuse histories, helping them heal and creating a life they love. So I've been doing this for a little while. This is my first official Blab, but I'm really glad that you're here. And to anybody watching this on replay, thanks for watching. So this will be just kind of Candace and I talking on video for the first part. You know, I'm not sure how long that's going to go. You're welcome to comment and ask questions. I will try to get to them throughout. And then if at the end, if time allows, I will allow people to come on as long as you're on point to ask questions. If you have a question, you are welcome to join us in that sense. So welcome everybody. So again, if you think somebody might benefit from this conversation, please consider sharing. So I've told you who I am. Candace, do you want to just kind of give the not the long details, but
quick deep
about who you are?
Who I am. So I manage a hotel in the French Quarter in New Orleans, which is always entertaining and keeps me very, very busy. I also am a political activist. I do a lot, work on campaigns locally and at a national level. But I guess most importantly, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse and am currently working on healing, which is one of the reasons I'm here today.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? Why did you decide to do this?
Well, the short answer would be connection, visibility, and kicking fear in the ass, saying fuck you to fear, really. You know, hearing from survivors, whether it's been on YouTube or connecting with them personally, has helped me so much in realizing that I'm not alone and that we're all kind of in the same boat. And I want people to know that if I can do this, they can do it too, because there's not anything special about me that allows me to do this and not them. And also, visibility is so important. I think as a country, we're talking about abuse in terms of how to stop it, but we're not talking about healing. And I know you've talked a lot about that. And I think we need to continue having conversations about it. I don't think you can have enough conversations about it. And then,
yeah,
I
completely agree.
Yeah. And for me personally, I've always believed in getting off the sidelines on this issue, really. But the fear of people knowing has kept me from doing that. So this is me saying, like I said, fuck you to fear. I'm going to do it anyway, because I believe that it's that important.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I think that, that's kind of not all of that, but the idea of talking about it is really why I do this, all of this, whether it's this conversation, any of the other things that I'm doing, it's all about wanting the conversation to be happening about healing, because we're not doing that. And that's why I'm so looking forward to this conversation, because I think that, it's one thing for me to talk about my healing, because I've been on the other side for a while, and it's one thing to hear me talk about it, but to have somebody else talk about it who's kind of in it, I think is just really, really a great opportunity. So, and I think it will be beneficial for a lot of people. So do you want to share, just kind of give people a little bit of background in terms of your story, your history?
Certainly. So I grew up in a dysfunctional family where there was a lot of addiction, alcoholism, neglect. I was left alone a lot of the time to fend for myself. And my abuse actually started relatively early. I was 5 when a neighbor raped me. And that, of course, was devastating to me in many ways. From that moment, I had fear, always fear. Is it going to happen again? Just fear in general, and confusion and not knowing what was going on. A few years later, I was abused again by someone else, and having multiple abusers filled me with shame. It fills me with shame now, and it filled me with shame then. And it wasn't until I actually watched one of your videos, Peggy, that I found out that I wasn't the only one that had multiple abusers, because I swear I thought, it's me. It has to be something about me. I was bad. I'm doing this. I'm causing this problem. And, to cope with all of those things, I started using drugs around 20 to help me numb, and became addicted really quickly to it. And during all that time, though, I was able to be successful professionally, which is strange, but it happened because I was focused, just completely focused on that. So I didn't have to think about anything else. And I think being successful held me back in terms of thinking that I need to heal anything. I knew I needed to get sober. That was obvious to me. But thinking about healing from abuse, well, I just didn't think that was even a problem. I minimized the abuse in my mind. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was never even on my radar. Mm-hmm. And then I got sober. And once I got sober, I couldn't pretend that it wasn't there anymore, because I didn't have that crutch anymore. And I saw a YouTube video, a Peggy YouTube video. I don't know which one it was, Peggy. I think it was the one on you healing. And it planted that seed. I can remember that day. I at that point, I was relatively new to being sober. I was cutting every day. I saw your video, and I think it hit me right at the perfect time. And it planted the seed. And I know you've used that term before, but it really did. It planted the seed, and then I kind of went away from it, and I didn't think about it for a little bit. And then about 3 months later, I started therapy. And therapy really didn't work well for me. That dynamic just wasn't something that worked for me. I'm sure it works for a lot of people. And then I saw that you were doing online coaching. And, it worked well with what I had to do related to my job and everything. And I started working with you. And now look at me, I'm on Blab and we're talking about healing.
Yes, and I think that's so amazing because it wasn't that long ago that the idea of people knowing was like out of the question.
It was huge for me. I said, never, ever, ever will that happen. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and yet, like you said, here you are on Blab, on live. The fact that it's live is what really kind of makes me a
Makes
little
it
bit more
fun.
nervous.
It makes it fun.
It does make it fun, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely
Yeah,
have adrenaline for sure.
yeah. So, you talked about so many different things that I think are things that absolutely almost everybody can relate to in one aspect or another. Maybe not everybody turns to drugs, but everybody turns to some form of really unhealthy coping. And that's all it is. Addiction is just an unhealthy coping mechanism. But when you're in it and you're doing that, you're doing it to mask, all of the difficulties that you're trying not to face. And it's effective, in many ways, it's quite effective. Um, and then once you're no longer doing that, you do have to find either another coping mechanism or you have to face it. And it, I've always said that, and it's why my practice is called Courageous Journeys, because facing the reality that your life is not working, facing the reality that this happened and I need to do something about it, and it's affecting my life, is such an incredibly courageous thing to do. It really is, and this is for you certainly, but for anybody watching this, it's really going through the healing process, acknowledging that something happened, is such a courageous step. And there's so many things that hold you back. When you talked about really ultimately kind of coming down to denial and that causing you to believe that you weren't really affected by it, that it wasn't a big deal, all of those things, and you're successful. So if somebody looks at you and they think, well, she's got her shit together, she's, obviously fine. And I think that that's one of the kind of difficult things is that there's so many women and men who are walking around who, to look at them, they look like they're fine, but underneath, not so much. And even for survivors themselves to be in such denial, when you tell yourself you're fine, when you tell yourself they weren't really affected by it, it just reaffirms that. It continues to minimize your experience, which is more wounding, but it's what keeps you just kind of putting one foot in front of the other and living day to day.
Oh, and absolutely. And I was terrified. I actually liked that I didn't have emotions.
I remember that.
I did not want to get rid of, I didn't want to have feelings. I wanted to have feelings. My wife wanted me to have feelings, but I did not want to have feelings because I really thought that, I thought that if I had feelings that I wouldn't get out of bed, one. And I thought that professionally it would hurt me because I really thought that I was able to do a lot of things because I didn't have feelings involved in it. So I was terrified of having feelings, and I was terrified of not being able to minimize or deny anymore because I knew that was coming. I knew if I was going to do healing and be all in, that was going to be part of the process.
Yeah. And do you mind talking a little bit more about that? So you talked about kind of fear of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's such a huge thing for really pretty much everybody who has difficulty feeling, no matter what their history is. But especially when you have a history of abuse and you've been using denial or minimizing as a way of coping. I think that I know that people have this idea that if you allow yourself to feel or connect with your experience, that you're going to end up kind of like curled up in a ball in the back of your closet and you're not going to be able to function in the world, which is understandable that people feel that and fear that. But that's not necessarily the reality. So can you do you have anything to kind of talk about in that sense? What that's
Well, I'm not in the corner crying yet, so it's not my reality yet. But yes, that fear, I mean, because you don't, for me, I didn't have any emotion. So I really didn't know what it was going to be like. I thought I was going to be this person that now has feelings and cried all the time and was always emotional. And that is like not me. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't lose that. And so I know that was a big thing for me. But also, I had a lot of fear of connection. Like the thought of the word connection still makes me a little ill. Just like the thought of the word of vulnerability literally makes my body clench. I don't like that word at all. But yeah, that fear of connection is huge. It still is huge for me. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you're not there yet. You're not in the corner of the closet yet. Well, and I would say, given what I know about where you are in this healing process, if that were going to happen, it would have happened.
You think? I think so too. I think maybe we might be past that part.
Yes. And even though, there's been a lot that we've talked about. There's been a lot that you shared. There's been a lot that's been going on over the course of our work together. And there's been some difficulty for sure. But that hasn't happened.
No, it has not happened.
Yes. And I think.
And you told me it wasn't going to happen, but I didn't believe you. But.
And I think that's such an important point because, it's one thing for me to like doing the YouTube videos. It's one thing for me to talk about that. But then to hear somebody actually who's kind of still in the process acknowledge that is a huge fear. But even when things have been difficult, even when it seems that something would have caused you to end up there, that you didn't, that you were able to manage that and come through that. And we'll talk about it more, but recognize some pretty significant things that have shifted. So
absolutely. And just even thinking about it, I think about how in our sessions I used to say, please don't say connection one more time, because you said it. It's like you had a word count. You had to say it so much. It stressed me out so much. Connection. And I think about now the huge role that connection has played in helping me move through the process and how much I fought that tooth and nail and still do, but a little less every day. And I think about why, and, really I spent my whole life avoiding connection and feeling of any kind, and just constantly building up those walls, making sure nobody can see me. And I really think I did that because I was so scared that if people saw me, the real me, the whole me, that they would see that what I perceived is that weak, vulnerable, worthless little girl inside, and not the successful professional person I was on the outside. And that's huge for me, that I have allowed people, allowed the connection, risked the vulnerability, as you like to say, and allowed people to see the whole me, even that damaged part that's so full of shame. Letting them see that has been life altering, really has been, because, well, I don't know why. You can possibly tell me more why it has helped me, but it has helped me tremendously.
Yeah. And that is huge. And that's one of the biggest factors in healing. And the reason that it is such a big factor is, like you were talking about, you built these walls because you didn't want somebody to see the real you, or what you perceived to be the real you. But your perception of the real you was the shame that you carried. It's the shame that every survivor carries. I've never known a survivor who didn't actually have shame. Now, there's a lot of survivors who say that they don't have shame, but that's not the reality.
No, they're possibly like me and just don't know it because they're so disconnected, which is what
they're so in denial about it. So you build these walls and you don't allow connection because you don't want people to see that shame. And in order to heal, you cannot heal without connection. It's absolutely impossible to heal without connection. And you're not the only person who is quite resistant to that, but you've definitely been one of the more vocal people who is resistant.
Possibly, yeah.
Who is very resistant to connection and just really is, adamant that, I don't want to do this. I can't do this. But
Well, I didn't see the point. Like I remember I kept asking you, I don't explain it to me why I need to be, connected to somebody. I don't understand. It makes no
yeah,
sense.
and I think that that's a really good point. And the reason is because when you don't have connection, it's usually because you're self-protecting because of that shame and unworthiness. And if you don't allow yourself to connect to other people, you're able to continue to believe that unworthiness. You're able to continue to reinforce the idea that you're unworthy of connection, that you should be ashamed of these things, that if other people knew these things about you, then they wouldn't want to have anything to do with you. They wouldn't see you as successful anymore. When you start risking, allowing yourself to be vulnerable by risking connection and sharing yourself. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to share your story with everybody. It just means allowing people to see the real you. So if you're having a bad day, say you're having a bad day. Don't put on this facade that everything is fine. If you are, if you're feeling sad about something and you want a hug, ask your partner for a hug. Don't pretend that everything is fine and you don't need anybody, because that's just reinforcing that disconnection. So connection heals because through connecting, you're allowing people to see who you really are. Flaws, imperfections, wounds, and all. And of course, some people aren't going to see the wounds necessarily, and that's okay. But even just allowing people to see the real you. You're having a bad day. You're not feeling all excited. You're nervous about something, even though you have this really confident kind of persona and all of that. That's what builds connection. And it is only through connecting that you begin to see yourself the way that other people see you.
I know for me as well, I was able to separate myself. There was the professional Candace and then the person that had all that stuff happen to her. And I was able to separate that so well. And it was so disconnected from that when I started to connect with myself and started to connect with my feelings, I started to connect to all that pain and shame and all of those things that she felt. And that was quite painful, I will admit. But it helped me identify the shame that I had. And then, so I was able to talk about it. And then it lifted the burden, the weight that I had on my shoulders that I didn't even know was there. I mean, I didn't know. I just thought that's what everybody had. And so when I began to feel a little bit lighter every time I would talk to you or talk to some other survivors who I'm close with, it's kind of started to be a little more light, and that feels really good. It feels less heavy. And I really think connecting in that way too, just connecting to myself, was important.
Yes. Yeah, because when you're in denial, you are quite literally disconnected from a huge part of yourself, literally disconnected from a huge part of yourself. And you can't heal. I always say that you can't heal what you deny is wounded. And you can't. It's not possible. So connecting is in part connecting with yourself and allowing yourself to recognize, acknowledge the fact that not only did this happen, but in fact you are affected by it, and being able to recognize these different pieces in the ways that you're affected by it. You talked about different things. You talked about the shame and the drugs and being in denial and not having feelings. You talked about these different things, and those are a lot of the very common ways. And there's some other things too. But when you recognize these things about yourself, but yet you're not connecting it to abuse, you're telling yourself you weren't affected by abuse, but yet you feel bad because you are an addict. You feel shame because either you don't have sex at all or you have a lot of sex. You feel shame about any number of things. You feel guilty about things. You blame yourself for things. When you hold on to that and you don't acknowledge it, you cannot possibly heal. You really can't. And that's why being able to talk about these things is such an important piece. And I will say that, I always get resistance from people when I talk about the fact that you have to take risks, you have to be vulnerable, and connect. There's always some level of resistance because there's so much fear around connecting, because people don't want to be seen. People
Yeah.
do not want to be seen. But as kind of acknowledge that it is through allowing yourself to be seen that you begin to recognize that you're okay.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I honestly think too, allowing yourself to be seen and as a whole person and talking to these people, then their feedback helps too, because I had a narrative in my mind. I know you and I have always talked about this. I have a narrative in my mind, and the debate side of my mind that says it was all my fault always wins, right?
Mhm.
And I needed you and others when I share that story, they gave me the other side of that debate. And so I'm slowly but surely able to say, well, maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe, so having that, you have to be able to share for somebody to actually tell you that back. So you have to connect and actually share your story so that they can say, Candace, you didn't have anything to be ashamed of. And so I use that a lot. And I really think that was like a, a little bit of a turning point when I was finally able to win in my mind in debating. Some days, not every day.
And
Maybe one day a week I win, but I'm okay with that one day a week.
yeah, and that's part of the process because it starts as one time. It starts as one time having that conversation in your head, and you're able to say, maybe it wasn't my fault. And then another time it will happen. You might have a lot of days in between where the other side wins out. But over time, the side that knows better ends up winning out more often than the side that continues to blame you. And that's what healing is. That's exactly what the process of healing is. It's over time that the part of you that's healing starts winning out more so than the part of you that's been holding on all this time. And for me, that's what's so incredibly exciting and energizing about doing this work, because it can take a while sometimes for people to really be able to see that. But when they do, it's just like, yay!
Well, I do believe I sent you, an email. What was that, like yesterday? Because I saw the progress a little bit. And then in reflecting back and thinking about doing this blab and really what I wanted to share, I was like, oh my God, I remembered that first session and where I'm at now. And I'm like, man, there really has been some progress there. I really, in that moment, was able to see it. And I was very happy that I was actually able to see it at all, really.
Yeah. And do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Just kind of so you've talked a little bit about what has helped you heal, and you acknowledged connection and sharing. Sharing has been helpful. What kinds of things, if you don't mind sharing, have you noticed? So you said, you mentioned an email that you sent. What kinds of things have you noticed?
Noticed
It's
how, like,
different.
noticed that's different.
Mhm.
Well, I'm on Blab talking about my abuse, for which I swore that I would never ever speak about. So
And
that,
why do you think that is? Why do you think that you're able to do that now?
well, I'm not 100% sure what changed in me that made me want to do it. I channeling my inner badass, as we like to say. And I think the shame is not as strong.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a strong hold on me like it did
Yeah,
before.
and I think that certainly your inner badass is absolutely one of the reasons.
Absolutely.
Um, but I do think that being able, having shared your shame allows you to let go of it, and it takes time. I mean, it doesn't just magically disappear, when you share, but it daily it tends to dissipate. And when you let go of shame, it does give you the freedom to be able to share your story, because your story is your story. It's not who you are. And that's the difference. When you're carrying shame, when you think about abuse, when you think about your abuse, when you think about telling anybody, all you're connected to is the shame. Once you've been able to start to let go of that, it's your story. It's not who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm working on that. I am certainly 100% a work in progress for sure.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about things that maybe are a little different. Well, I have feelings now, a little more,
Mm.
which my wife is happy about sometimes. Um, and that's nice. And, I think I'm able to see things, but like gratitude. I know we may talk about that later, but I really couldn't find things to be grateful for much, but I can see it now in all kinds of ways. And though it makes me sick sometimes, the ridiculousness that I stop and smell a flower that I did. However, it feels good. And the fact that I'm able to feel good, the fact that I'm able to find peace sometimes, not all the time, but those moments of peace and those moments of clarity are wonderful because I never had that before. So getting that little moments are great.
Yeah. And so you just talked about gratitude, and that's one of the tools kind of to use in healing among many. What are a couple of the other things that you've been doing that have been, specifically that you've tried to incorporate that have been helpful for you?
It's helping me a lot. Well, I can think of a few things. I know, in the beginning of healing, my thoughts were just constant, like intrusively. Abuse was on my mind constantly. And you suggested breathing. And of course, I'm like, I'm breathing now. What do you mean breathing? But I was all in for healing. So you suggested to set my alarm hourly at work, which I thought was ridiculous. However, I needed to do something because what I was doing was not working. So I started to set my alarm, and literally on the first day, I noticed a difference. Not a big difference, but one, I noticed that I was more patient with my staff, which is great. And that I just, I don't know, it calmed me for that moment. And I have been doing that since, and that's been a while since I started that. And so it's funny, at work, my alarm goes off every hour. Sometimes if I'm having a really bad day, I'll set it to every 30 minutes. And it depends on the day of the week. But if my staff is around me now, they know what it is for. And so if they hear it go off, because it has a specific ring to it, and they'll be like, oh, it's breathing time. And literally we will breathe in and we breathe out. And I count in my mind my breathing, and it helps me stay present. And I think, and grounded. And I don't know when the change started, but I felt that the intrusive thoughts weren't there as much. They were there, but because I was present, these things aren't happening to me now, right? And so because I was able to be present, those thoughts were there, but they weren't overwhelming my brain. And every day I would do the breathing, and they would get less and less overwhelming in my mind, to the point where right now I can have them, and I do have them. And this does not always help. Some days are just shit. But it helps a lot of the times. Just help me realize that I'm okay now. I'm fine. It's there, but it's not going to take control of my day. And I can't believe that breathing has done that, but it really has.
Yeah. And what you were just saying, I think is exactly why it does work, because no matter what your history is, most people tend to have constant thoughts going through their mind, and some people are aware of them and many people are not. But they affect you. They affect how you're feeling, what you're thinking, and how you behave. When you're not conscious of that or aware of that, they overpower you. They control everything. And when you take even just a moment to have a couple of intentional breaths, it stops that momentum. Like if that's a train, if you take a break from that and focus on your breathing for just a couple of breaths, it stops that train. So you have a moment to step away from that and kind of refocus. If you want to, you may go back, your mind, and I'm sure you've had this, your mind may go right back to having those same thoughts again, but at least for those couple of breaths, you had a break. And the more you practice that, we talked about this early on, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes and the more effective it becomes, because your body gets used to it. And I remember the resistance that you had to it. I remember, I think there might have even been a little eye roll.
There was a lot of eye roll and a lot of smart ass language, I'm sure, because I could not wrap my mind around the thought that you're telling me that breathing is going to help me. But it really did from that first day, and it still does now. And not just in terms of like breathing for healing stuff, but just in general in life, when I'm getting mad about something or angry about something at work, just breathing stops it.
Yeah.
It stops, and sometimes I go back to it, the anger or aggravation, but a lot of times it doesn't have that momentum it had before because it's been stopped, and so now it's not as
That's a
bad.
great way to kind of think about it, is in regards to momentum. Yeah, it really kind of just completely stops it, and then it kind of has to, you kind of have to take off again in order to get to that same place. But that's
I'm trying to think what else. So gratitude, finding, being able to find great things that I'm grateful for is great, and it's also helps you stay present because I'm finding those things in present day.
yeah.
And also it helps with worthiness. I know, like, that I deserve this stuff that is happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I can find gratitude in me that I'm a badass. That's good.
Yeah.
But meditation too. I think I was having a lot of nightmares and night terrors and all of those things. And you, of course, said meditation. And then I really wanted to vomit. If you recall.
Yes. I remember meditation. Like not even talking. I think the first time I mentioned it to you, I don't think I used the term meditation. I think I used visualizing.
You probably said something else because I'm sure I rolled. Because I am not that person. One, I'm not a person to find gratitude in things and breathing, and now I'm meditating because I'm not like some Buddhist Zen person. That's not me. However, I wanted to sleep, and I remember thinking, well, let me try this. Honestly, I thought, let me try this so that I can tell Peggy it doesn't work, that's bullshit.
I appreciate
but
your honesty.
I do. Well, I've said that to you before, I think. But I went all in on it. I said, if I'm going to try it, I'm going to try it. And I think we talked about what is my calm thoughts are, and I have incorporated that into my nights, and it has helped tremendously. Me feeling safe, like grounding myself, and that I'm safe, and helping me go to bed happy and thinking about the beach. And though it has not cured the nightmares, they're not as frequent, for sure. I mean, they're there, and some days it's awful, but they're not always there. And I'll take that any day of the week to have a few nights sleep. Absolutely. So that and the breathing and gratitude really has changed, has helped me do things healthy instead of cutting and being self-sabotaging and all of the other ways that I would try to hurt myself while we were going through this healing process.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you just brought that up, because that was one of the things that I thought about when you had mentioned cutting before. And there's a lot of people potentially who are going to watch this who have used really self-destructive ways of coping, and there's often a lot of shame around those coping mechanisms. And one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about this process is so often, and this is one of the things that actually a lot of therapists do, if somebody comes in and they're cutting, they'll often focus on the cutting, like, doing a lot of behavior management and ways to not cut and focus on the cutting. And that's not how I work with people. The cutting is a symptom of the pain. And so you acknowledge that you're doing some of these other things now instead of cutting, but we didn't talk deliberately, specifically about doing these things instead of cutting.
No, we didn't.
Just happened. We did at one point talk about something specific instead, before you cut.
Oh, I remember, and that did not go over well.
But the journaling, like writing first, sometimes, that puts enough space in between. Not all the time.
Well, I was able to breathe first, and I think that's what I did, because me, I don't like to journal. Yeah. I'm not at that point yet. But breathing in between the cutting, I think, helped me sometimes. I mean, I haven't cut in a long time, and I say that, and I recall a conversation that we had, in that I had said, I haven't cut, and I acknowledged that I hadn't cut in like months or weeks. I don't know what it was. And then literally 2 days later, I cut and was being self-sabotaging, because I'm not quite sure why I did it, but it was like, well, I have to do this now because I can't be making healthy decisions.
Yeah.
And started right then, did it again.
And that is such an important point about the self-sabotage. So often when people are healing, because of the unworthiness and undeserving piece of it, people will often sabotage their own healing. And that makes people struggle even more, especially if you're intelligent and successful. You think, what the hell is wrong with me? Why am I doing this? This proves that, I really can't heal. Um, but but you do that because there's some fear, because you don't really know what it means to heal yet, and you don't know that you still don't necessarily believe that you deserve it, and so there's some self-sabotaging there. But the reality is that it is a process. You're not going to suddenly one day choose a healthy coping skill instead of an unhealthy one, and then all of a sudden you're only choosing healthy. You're gonna go back and forth for a while. But over time, instead of just one day without it, it's two, and then it's a week, and then it's a month, and then it's months, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, I don't remember the last time I cut, or whatever it might be. And that's what the process of healing it is. Healing is. It's not about all or nothing. It's a process, and when you're in it and you can see that it's a process, I think that you feel a lot more compassion for yourself.
I'm working on the compassion. We know I don't really have that much compassion or patience for myself, but that's a work in progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, you identified some very specific things, the meditating, the breathing, the gratitude. That's all been really helpful for you. And those are things that I generally recommend really to everybody, kind of no matter what your history is. I think it's good. But I think that, while those have been really healthy ways of coping and have been helpful for you to kind of, and other people to kind of navigate this journey, I think it is important to recognize that the things that have been most helpful have been the things that maybe there was a little bit more resistance to or fear around. Yes, you had some resistance to gratitude and meditating, but that was more like, what the hell is that? I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Like, really?
Yeah. But like the shame, the vulnerability, the connecting, the acknowledging that you're affected, because that's huge. So much of people surviving is about being in denial about the significant way that you've been impacted. And I can't tell you how many women and men who I've known and worked with over the years who will tell me, that doesn't bother me anymore. I'm on the other side. I can talk about it. It doesn't bother me at all. I've created all this success, which they think proves that they're not affected by it. Because in the media, we only tend to see these images of women who are kind of crazy and, either suicidal or homicidal and, or hospitalized or something. And that's not the reality. So a lot of people think that they're not really affected by it anymore because maybe they don't think about it. Maybe they are able to say they've forgiven their abuser and therefore, they've healed. And then when we start really talking about things, that's not necessarily the case. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I think that you sharing your story is really so beneficial, because you're kind of completely the opposite of what we tend to see in the media in terms of, what somebody's going to think or know about you, just by looking at you or looking at your bio or whatever it is. And I think that that's really important, because 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys is sexually abused. And that's a lot of people, and a lot of people who are living, much like you did. You're motivated, you're determined, you're strong, you're creating the life that you want to create, but yet there's this underlying pain that's keeping you from living your life completely.
Well, it makes me think about, 2 things. I think I avoided acknowledging or said that I wasn't affected for quite some time in our sessions. I believe that would have been me. And secondly, I think I always thought, well, what is going to be the benefit of me healing? Because I'm successful now, and I believe you said, and I really took it to heart, that I would actually appreciate it and feel it, because I'm being successful, but I'm not even a whole person. I don't even, at that point, don't have any feelings. And so that it will even be better than it is now. And that I could be even more successful because I don't have these other things pulling me down. And, I really took that to heart. And I I think that that has certainly been the case because I can appreciate things more than I have been before,
Mhm.
I think.
Yeah, and I think that's so incredibly powerful. Um, and I really do appreciate you sharing because I know that, whether it's people who are here now or people that may watch this on a replay, there are so many women who can relate to so much of what you've shared. And, like I said, it's one thing for me to talk about things, and a lot of people do connect to the things that I say, but to actually, for us to have this conversation and for you to be willing to share all of this, because you are still on your journey, you acknowledge that you're not there yet, and that there's some days that are really difficult, and that is part of the process. But even with that, being able to recognize how much things have actually changed already, and I don't know about you, but like I'm thinking, so isn't that really exciting to think about what else will come?
Absolutely, that is very true. Yes, I think great things. Stay tuned is like what I like to say now. Stay tuned for what's to come next.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So I think um, I think I've kind of gone over the things that I had intended for us to talk about. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Anything?
No, I think we've kind of hit all of the things that I wanted to talk about as well.
Okay. So I am, if anybody,
Do we have any questions on there
not
on the board?
not really. Neve did say that I think it was your thoughts around like rolling your eyes about meditating and breathing and all of that. Those were exactly her thoughts. Um,
Trust me, I understand your thoughts
and I
on
do get
that.
that from a lot of people. In fact, generally speaking, when I am working with somebody and I bring up the idea of meditating, I usually don't actually use that term. I talk about breathing, which is, if a focused breath is a meditation. So I talk about breathing and I talk about visualizing. I don't usually use the word meditation in the beginning because many people have the same reaction to a certain degree. So many people have that reaction, so I don't usually talk about meditating actually in the beginning because it is such a like, what? I'm not doing that.
I believe you changed a lot of words. You stopped using, I forgot the words you started using instead of connection too, because I would get so aggravated with connection.
Vulnerable was one I remember.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
vulnerable is
Hmm.
not something that people want to think about. Neve earlier said that you were brave, amazing. You're amazing for sharing this, Candace.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And then Austin, maybe, I'm not sure, says be mindful, focus on your breath. Yeah, that being mindful, being aware, we just did our book group, A New Earth. But focusing on your breath can really pretty drastically change whatever is going on for you in any given moment. No matter what's going on, no matter what your history is, focusing on your breath really can be pretty magical. There's not, I don't talk about magic, and I always say that it's not magic, but it's pretty amazing how significantly breath can change your experience. So does anybody have any questions? I'm happy to answer questions. If there's anybody who would actually like to jump on and ask a question relative to this topic specifically, I am happy to also open for somebody joining on video. If you would like to do that, just know that my understanding is if you join on video and this is shared, your handle will be tweeted out. But I'm happy to have somebody join if you do have a question for either myself or Candace in this, or you can certainly post questions or comments on the just in the chat as well if you have anything you'd like to add.
I cannot believe it's been 50 minutes
I
already. It's
know.
kind of flown by,
That's kind of how I
honestly.
feel doing Periscope sometimes. It's like, oh my God, that was an hour long.
Right, right. I thought it was gonna feel like a second was like not torture, but I thought I would feel it more. But no, this went quick.
It did go very, very quickly. So do you have any I don't know if there's anybody watching this who maybe, hasn't even recognized that there's healing to do, whether it's because they think they already have, or they just don't think that they were affected, or maybe they're early on in their healing process. Do you have anything that you'd like to, any words of wisdom or any suggestions that you might give to them?
Well, my one first suggestion would be find a good mentor, coach, therapist that you can actually feel like you can connect with. Because I think if I would have been with the therapist that I was with before, I would not be here. I probably would have quit and probably still be on drugs or something right now. So that is important. And I think for me, it was important for me to say, I'm going to do this damn thing. I'm going to do it. I threw myself in it. And, some people that might not work for them, but for me, it was, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to like pussyfoot around. I'm just going to do it. And that helped, I think, once I got that mentality that I was going to do it. So when I had those really hard days and I knew that I was going to have to tell you things that I really didn't want to do, but I was like, you know what, you're doing this. And that helped a lot. Going all in helped a lot, not kind of doing it, but doing
Yeah.
it and making it a priority in my life. That was important too, because if I didn't make it a priority, I wouldn't be where I'm at yet here now.
And I think that's such a really important point. 2 points, really. You mentioned that for you, it was like you're all in. And that does work for some people and it doesn't work for other people. But part of that is because there's a lot of fear behind going all in. So that can be a big piece of that. But I also think that for you, part of your ability to kind of be all in is also that part of your personality that has allowed you to just continue to move forward, continuing to create, goals and achieve those goals and be very determined in your like professional life and all of that. That part of your personality that has allowed you to do that has also allowed you to say, I'm all in, I'm doing this. Where for me, when I think of a challenge, I can be all in, but there might be a but. that might be, that might come up. So it is different for different people, but without a doubt, certainly I would absolutely agree with you that the person that you're working with, first of all, you cannot do this alone. Nobody, no matter who you are, you cannot heal on your own. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how much education you've had. I don't care if you are a master's level, a PhD level, or a psychiatrist. You cannot heal from sexual abuse on your own because you're wounded in the context of a relationship, even if you don't actually know that person. It's a context of a relationship that you are betrayed and hurt, wounded. You can only heal that in the context of relationship. So I think that's...
And that was a big thing for me too, knowing that because I've done everything on my own.
Yeah.
And so the thought of saying to that I needed someone, I think we've had that conversation, I don't want to need anyone and I don't need anything. And so that was huge for me, saying, you know what, I do need someone. I do need something. That I have to have another person helping me out on this. That was huge.
And I have this, and somebody just asked me about it the other day. But I always talk about, one of my favorite quotes is, it's never too late to become what you might have been, and that we can't do this on our own, and all of that. I found this years ago, actually, and it says, we all need someone who gives us the courage to be who we were meant to be. And I love that because when I saw this, I took it very personally. Like, I was like, we all do. I say this to people all the time that they can't do it on their own, but I need to remind myself of that too. We all need somebody who kind of gives us the courage, who shows us. They don't necessarily give us the courage because that's within us already, but they show us that we have the courage to do that. So we do have a question. Go ahead first.
No, I was going to say, and seeing other people who have been through the process, like seeing you and you're on the other side, that too, just seeing that gives you hope.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I want people to talk about this, no matter where they're at in this journey, even if they haven't started healing yet, the more we talk about it, the more that we put a face to this issue and what the reality is, that it's not the person who is suicidal and homicidal. Yes, those people exist, but there's far more of us who are just normal people. Not that they're not normal, but just kind of living a normal life that most people would not know. It makes people just recognize that they're not alone and they're more likely to reach out. So we do have a question. I was almost raped by someone. How does that affect me? Sarah, that's a really interesting question, because that's one of the things that so many people will say to themselves, well, it didn't actually happen. So it's a really powerful way to minimize what happened to you. And what I would say, generally speaking, is that somebody who has been almost raped, and I don't know exactly what that means, so, I'm going to be somewhat graphic here. So if that means that somebody tried but did not complete a rape for whatever reason, you're absolutely going to be impacted in the same way. If somebody started to try to rape you, but you were able to stop it, or, it didn't move beyond you thinking that you were going to be raped, you can still be affected in really pretty much all the same ways. There might be a couple of small differences, but in terms of how you think about yourself, in terms of the blame that you put on yourself, in terms of shame that you might feel, fear, certainly, all of those things are really going to be the same. And I think that that's important for people to know too, that, the spectrum of abuse or assault is huge. And one of the things that people do, and I really, if you're watching this on replay, people compare themselves all the time. No matter where you fall in that spectrum of abuse, even if you're like, if this is the end where something happened one time by somebody you didn't know and they touched your breast, to on the far end where you were raped every day by your father for 25 years. No matter where you fall in that spectrum, or even by multiple people for 25 years, no matter where you fall in that spectrum, the long-term impact is actually going to be quite the same. There will be levels of betrayal and complicated things that you have to heal, but in terms of the overall impact, it really is going to be pretty much the same. And when somebody compares themselves, no matter where you are in that spectrum, you're going to compare yourself to other people. And even the person on that far end is going to compare their experience with somebody else's and think and use it, actually, that comparison, as a way to minimize their own experience. So that's one of the things that we do. It's a coping mechanism to be able to minimize your own experience. But the damage, the long-term impact, is very much the same, almost regardless of where you fall on that spectrum. And I think that's hard for people to really understand.
Well, it also makes me think of how easy you can fall into the comparison trap in general.
Yes.
Right? Around apparently vulnerable things. Because like I was talking to you earlier about just comparing. I think I have a lot of issues about telling and not telling. And when I hear people say that they told at age 4, I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I think to myself, why couldn't I have been that badass? And why couldn't I have done that? And so it's very easy to fall into that comparison, whether it's how I was abused compared to you, or how I told or didn't tell, or any of those things.
Or even how you're healing and not healing. There's so many different ways. And, you mentioned, and we didn't really talk too much about it, but you mentioned the multiple abusers, and that you didn't even know that was common until watching my video. And that's one of the things that people compare to when they're thinking. They don't necessarily compare it and think, well, my abuse was worse because I had multiple abusers. No, they compare that, thinking that other people only had one, and thinking, see, it really is my fault because it happened to me by more than one person. So it's amazing the ways that we will compare ourselves to other people to prove, at least in our own minds, to prove what we already believe about ourselves. And almost anytime you're comparing yourself to somebody, it's almost never an accurate representation of reality. But it's hard to move away from that. And it's interesting that you mentioned in areas where we're vulnerable, and that is absolutely where it tends to show up. If we are minimizing our own abuse or denying our own abuse, we're going to be very vulnerable in that. And so that's where that comparison is very easily going to come up. And it happens all the time. And which is another reason why I think it's helpful to, to have you here and talk about this and where you are in the process. Because I know there's going to be somebody who's comparing themselves to you and thinking, why can't I get up there and, be brave enough, to put myself out there in that way. And it's not about that. Yes, of course you're brave and courageous for doing this, but it doesn't mean that other people aren't. It's just that where you are, and like you said, you're kind of like all in and you're ready to say, fuck it, and I'm doing this. And so, here you are. For other people, it may show up in a different way, and that's okay. We do have another question from Neve. I have a question. If there is time, how can I stop myself from feeling guilty or from hating myself for not reporting my abuse? Do you have any thoughts about, I will answer that question. I'm not going to put that on you to answer that question, but do you have any thoughts about that, Candace?
Well, I can certainly relate to that question and feeling guilty about it, and still do feel guilty about it. How do you not? Well, I think that's a Peggy question because I still feel guilty about it, Neem, honestly.
And it's kind of a complicated thing because part of the reason that you feel guilty is because you blame yourself. But there's also the idea, and unfortunately, kind of law enforcement, the justice system plays a role in this too, that they tell you that you have an obligation to report if this happens to you. And as an advocate, you have no obligation to report anything. You can certainly if you choose to, but nobody can tell you that you should report this because it's such a complicated issue. And so ultimately, how do you get through or past the guilt about that? Ultimately, it's about being able to understand why you don't, and then being able to forgive yourself for that. Not that you necessarily have something to forgive yourself about, but being able to say to yourself and believe in the idea that it's okay that you choose not to. There's reasons that you choose not to, and those reasons are very valid reasons. And so, that's what I'm talking about now. Now, as a child, if you didn't report, well, just think about the fact that most children don't. Candace mentioned the 4-year-old. Well, that's actually incredibly rare. It is incredibly rare that a young child especially will disclose that they were abused at the time that it happened or within a very short period of time after it happened. That is actually quite rare when you think about how many children are being abused. Most people, even now, most people do not talk about their abuse with anybody, even like a therapist or coach or friend, until they're an adult. That's the reality for most people. Now, sometimes as a teenager, somebody might share it with a friend, but even then, that doesn't often happen. So instead of feeling guilty about not telling as a child, allow yourself to connect with the sisterhood, the brotherhood of survivors who also do not tell, because that is the reality. I didn't tell as a child. In fact, one of my abusers, I didn't tell anybody about until, I don't know how long ago it's been now, 6, 7, 8 years ago or something like that. Nobody in my family knew, and it was a family member who abused me. And I did struggle with that. I felt like I should have done something, and I didn't. But it's a complicated process. It's not an easy thing to do, but you can do it. It's about understanding, having compassion for what it means to actually be a survivor and the reality of what it's going to do in your life if you choose to tell. So there's no shame, there's no guilt in not telling. And there will be people who would say, especially law enforcement or justice, who would say you have an obligation, and that's just not true. Their focus is on prosecuting, getting criminals off the street, and I get that. But your focus is surviving and healing. That's the only person that you have any control over. And the truth, unfortunate truth, is that even when you do disclose or report, rarely does anything come of it. And that is a reality. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't want to come forward and report to police. So you're definitely not alone in that. And Princess C. Tiana says she struggles with the same thing. I think universally, everybody that I've ever said that. So thank you for that question. Now, does anybody else have a question real quick? Um, and it is really just something to keep in mind. Candace mentioned once or twice the idea of planting a seed. It really is, and I do talk about that. It really is, hearing, whether it's me talking or somebody else talking, just allowing yourself to be open for that possibility that it could be true, that what I said really might actually be true. And then over time, it takes root and you begin to believe in it a little bit more.
Also, I'm thinking to myself, having compassion for yourself, which is something that I struggle with, is very important too, because you deserve to have some compassion for yourself. And so does your little little me deserves that compassion too. Though I have problems giving myself that compassion, everybody deserves a little compassion around that.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear you say that, Candace.
Shut up. I knew you were going to say something about that.
Though I know you would, I know you believe that for other people.
I do. I'm okay. That's what I'm saying. We should have some compassion for ourselves if we didn't tell that, we were children, and just think about the fact that then we had to keep that secret and we didn't say anything to anybody, and how hard it is to be silent for that long and hold that in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've said this before, that I really do think that experiencing childhood sexual abuse in particular and holding on to that secret is the most damaging thing that you experience as a child, because it is in isolation and there's so much shame around it. But healing is possible. Princess C says, I currently feel a bit hopeless about ever feeling normal. You're not alone. Candace, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think I have felt that since I started my healing journey, I have felt hopeless on many occasions and forgotten why it was that I wanted to heal. And I think Peggy did a great Periscope on the other person holding that hope for you and kind of bringing you back. And it took me remembering why it is that I wanted to heal in the first place to have it, because it's a hope. Sometimes it is very hopeless. I mean, you can't see the other side of anything. You can't even see that it's even there. And you just have to believe. And sometimes believing is hard when you can't see anything. And so I can certainly relate to feeling hopeless. I felt that quite often since I started this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I remember that Periscope. It was one of these little cards that I made about hope, that I talked about that, and that it is difficult. And when you're having a bad time, or especially, when people feel really hopeless sometimes, is when they've noticed some positive steps. They've noticed a couple of really good days, or they notice that they've really been maybe connecting with people or something like that. And then you have a bad day or a bad few days. It can leave you feeling even more hopeless. And there's reasons for that, but you end up feeling kind of worse sometimes than you did before. But even though you're feeling that sense of hopelessness, it doesn't mean that there isn't hope. It's just that you're not able to see it because of how much struggle there is in that moment. But it's there, and Candace certainly talked about it, and everybody I've ever worked with, including myself in my own experience, that in those bad times, especially when you feel like you've put so much effort into healing, during those bad times, it really can feel impossible to accept that there could be something on that other side. Because like you said, you can't see it. Like when I talk about climbing that mountain, I was thinking that no idea. You have no idea that there's a top somewhere up there that you can actually reach, because there's too many trees, there's too many obstacles in the way, and you just cannot see it.
And I think that proves the point of why you can't do it alone, that you need somebody who knows that it's there, and that kind of just like you talked about in that YouTube video about finding the summit or going to the summit or whatever it was. I think that's what's worked well with me, with you, is that I know you've been there and you can kind of help me navigate and mentor me up that mountain. But there's been days I couldn't see it. And if I would have been doing this alone, I would have given up. But I had somebody saying, Candace, it's there. I'm telling you, it's there. And so that's important. And I think that's one reason you can't do it by yourself.
Yeah. And that you're not alone, that you're
Yeah.
not doing it alone, which I think is also important. So she says, I think I go through cycles. I'll be okay for a while, then not be okay, then give up and box everything up again. Yeah. Dealing a lot with depression and anxiety. And that tends to happen when you pull back and you isolate. That tends to happen. Isolation is the worst possible thing you can do when it comes to healing. Candace, you're kind of smiling about that.
Well, because I believe that that is definitely something that I have done, and that was not that long ago that I said, fuck this connection. I'm not doing it. I need a break. I'm not doing it. And I literally isolated, and I made very poor decisions, and it was a very bad thing. And yeah, isolation is awful. And if you can avoid it at all costs, because it can bring you down a bad road.
It really can. And do you mind if I share just kind of what you said in that first email about connection?
I don't remember. I can't believe you do.
um, so she just kind of shares, just share with us that something happened not too long ago, and she sent me an email saying, "Do you really think that connection is necessary for everybody?" or something along that line? Because I just don't think it's for me.
I remember that now.
Yeah, and so we had to do some conversations around that. But it is, when you find yourself struggling, the natural inclination is to pull back because you feel safer when you're isolating. You feel safer when you're pulling back from connection. But when you pull back from connection, it reinforces those ideas of being unworthy and hopelessness, which leads to feeling even worse about yourself, and certainly depression and anxiety. So isolation really is about one of the worst things you can do. I would say it's even worse than cutting. Worse than, not suicide, obviously, but cutting is not the same as suicide. It's worse than almost any other unhealthy coping mechanism. Because it creates it allows the shame to grow. It creates disconnection and leading to more depression and anxiety, which is a cycle because then you tend to isolate even more. So isolation is really about the worst thing that you can do.
I completely agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you to Andy, thank you for sharing your stories with so much transparency. I'm here today to understand how much of a lasting impact sexual abuse can have on people currently in a position of trying to understand what someone else is going through. Well, Andy, hopefully you can catch the replay if you haven't been on here, because we've talked about a lot. But what I will say is sexual abuse, if somebody does not go through the process of healing, sexual abuse will impact that person sometimes in really obvious ways, sometimes in more insidious ways throughout their entire life, literally throughout their entire life. And it affects everything. It affects how you see yourself. It affects relationships. It affects the choices that you make. And when I say how you see yourself, it ultimately has to do with worthiness. And when you don't believe that you're worthy, you're not going to live the life that you were meant to live, that you're capable of living. And so you're likely to choose really unhealthy relationships, or if you have healthy relationships in your life, you're likely to push them away or sabotage them. There certainly is more information if you watch the replay, and I've got tons of videos on YouTube. Not tons, I've got a lot of videos on YouTube as well. But absolutely, it has such a profound effect on people throughout their entire life in so many different ways. And even as Candace was saying, even when it looks like your life is fine and you think that your life is fine and going really, really smoothly, it's there, it's under the surface. So thank you. I really appreciate your question. I hope that kind of at least gives you a little bit of information and maybe direct you to finding some more information. This is my first official Blab. I loved it. I thought it was great, Candace.
It was great.
Um,
I'll do another one with you if we come up with another good topic. I'm down for it. Domestic violence. It's a good one for this month.
Domestic violence, definitely a huge issue. Yes, my little purple. You haven't gotten your purple in yet?
Hey, back order?
Really?
Yeah, because I ordered a box, I think. Maybe they're going to make them. I don't know. But, Back order. I should get it next week.
That could be. I was gonna say maybe it's because so many people are flocking to Amazon to buy their purple.
Wouldn't that be great if that was the cause?
Yes, yeah. So I don't know if you saw that, Candace, but Andy says thank you. Keep sharing and inspiring others. So you are definitely the bigger part of what's being shared here today. So thank you. I forgot. I think you're in a different time zone, so I missed most of it. I am in the Eastern time zone. It is on replay. It does take a few minutes for this to process to be available on replay, but it will be here on Blab. You can watch it on replay. So, and you'll see most of the comments, I think, as well. I think it might be even possible to add additional comments as you're watching the replay from, if I understood correctly. So thank you to everybody who joined us. There's been some of you who have been here kind of the entire time. I really appreciate you being here. And if you do have any further questions, you can contact me any number of ways. Thank you, Nate, for being here and for your questions. Email healing@courageousjourneys.com. My website is courageousjourneys.com. We have a great tribe of courageous warriors over on Facebook. On Facebook, it's Courageous Journeys. So thank you so much, Candace, for being here and helping inspire anybody who happens to come across this.
Thank you, Peggy, for talking about it because it's so needed. Absolutely so needed. And nobody's talking about healing.
Well, I appreciate you being here because I talk about it all the time.
You're the only one I
know. but I don't get the opportunity to really, have other people kind of talk about the different things along with it. So I do hope that people, if this is a topic you're interested in, I hope that you do watch the replay and connect with us. And Candace's information is there if you want to follow her, especially if you're a Hillary supporter.
Absolutely. Come on over to my Twitter page.
So thank you again. Thank you to everybody who's joined us, and I will definitely look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much, Candace.
Bye, Peggy.
Night. Bye.